a perfect regular season, and a Big Ten championship, all for it to end immediately in the college football playoff quarterfinals against Ohio State. The Ducks were dominant this season, but they couldn't get past Ohio State for the second time in the Rose Bowl. And frankly, it wasn't particularly close. Oregon got flat out crushed and even trailed 34-0 at one point before losing 41-21. The Buckeyes were the number 8 seed coming into the game and crushed Tennessee in the first round of the playoffs before doing the same thing to the Ducks. But at the end of the day, Dan Lanning has done a great job at Oregon, and the Ducks should be back. Oregon missed the CFP last season when it was still just 4 teams, but they made sure to leave no doubt in anyone's mind en route to getting the number 1 seed in a bye this year. Even with just how bad the season ended, it was still one to remember for Oregon, and is another step in the right direction. Dan Lanning has already had a ton of success in Eugene since taking the head coaching job back in 2021 after he was the defensive coordinator at Georgia under Kirby Smart. After going undefeated and winning the national championship over Alabama, Lanning left for Oregon, replacing Mario Cristobal. And luckily, the Ducks didn't really have much of a rebuild at all. Much probably thanks to quarterback Bo Nix, who was just drafted and has already had a lot of early success in the NFL after the Broncos took him 12th overall. In year 1 under Lanning, Oregon went 9-3 with ranked wins over BYU, UCLA, and Utah. They were ranked as high as number 8 in the AP poll and finished at number 15 with a win against North Carolina in the Holiday Bowl. It was a good year 1, and they only got better. Oregon followed it up by going 10-2 and were as high as number 5. The Ducks eventually lost to Washington in the Pac-12 championship, but beat Liberty in the Fiesta Bowl. It was another good season and another step towards success for the Ducks, but it came with losing both Bo Nix and Troy Franklin to the draft. After just one player, Kayvon Thibodeau, was drafted in 2022, Lanning had 6 guys drafted after year 1, including first-rounder Christian Gonzalez. And then last year, it was 8 players who were drafted, and plenty more will come off the board in April. Lanning has already built a machine, and that was pretty evident this past season. There were some interesting questions for Oregon entering this season, mostly surrounding quarterback, with former UCF and Oklahoma starter Dillon Gabriel coming in, but most of those questions were silenced after the Ducks got off to a 3-0 start in non-conference play. They crushed Idaho before having to face off against Ashton Jeanty and Boise State. Now, Jeanty was still a problem, like he was all season long, but Oregon snuck away with a 37-34 victory. And Oregon followed it up by crushing former Pac-12 foe Oregon State. But then came the Big Ten slate for the Ducks, finally marking year 1 in the conference. And Oregon got off to a good start with some big wins against UCLA and Michigan State before a huge matchup at home versus Ohio State. The Buckeyes were number 2 in the country at the time, and they were clearly elite, but the Ducks, who were number 3 at the time, got the win 32-31 thanks to a late field goal. It really was a momentous win for Oregon and proved that not only do they belong in the Big Ten, but they could potentially win the conference. And the Ducks didn't slow down. Oregon shut out Purdue, crushed number 20 Illinois, beat the defending champion Michigan, and beat Maryland. Probably the most surprising test along the way came against Wisconsin. As fans were jumping, the Ducks trailed 13-6 entering the 4th quarter, but Oregon did tie it with a Jordan James touchdown before a late field goal set the Ducks apart. It was a close one, and slip-ups do happen, but Oregon still found a way to win, and they went on to crush Washington, a season removed from playing in the national championship, to close out their season. It set up a huge Big Ten championship. Unlike previous seasons, it was pretty clear both teams would make the college football playoff, but there was a bye on the line. Penn State was great all season long, and hell, they still are, but James Franklin has always seemed to struggle to win the big games, and that was the same case here. It ended 45-37, and Penn State had a shot, but Oregon was mostly in control. The Ducks led by 11 or more 5 different times to hold on, and Dillon Gabriel just played incredible. He threw for 283 yards and 4 touchdowns, while Tez Johnson caught 11 passes for 181 yards and a single touchdown. Oregon deserved the number 1 seed, and they got it, but it really wasn't a good draw. Despite being the #1 seed, I feel like it can still be argued that Oregon had the toughest path to the semifinals. I mean, I'd be willing to bet that most teams would rather play Texas, Penn State, or Notre Dame instead of Ohio State. Having to take on Ohio State or Tennessee was going to be rough for Oregon, but the Ducks had proven to be able to beat the best. Unfortunately though, it's hard to beat a really good team twice. In the rematch from October 12th, when Oregon narrowly escaped with a win at home over the Buckeyes, they weren't quite as lucky on neutral ground. It got ugly, and got ugly fast. Ohio State scored 3 plays in after a 45-yard Jeremiah Smith touchdown, and he was unstoppable. He scored a 43-yard touchdown in the second quarter to make it 24-0. He scored another touchdown, a 43-yarder in the second quarter to make it 24-0 Ohio State. Oregon then immediately went 3 and out, and on the first play for Ohio State, TreVeyon Henderson rushed for a 66-yard touchdown. Shout out to TreVeyon though, because he played high school ball right down the street from me. But just like that, it was 31-0, and the Buckeyes tacked on a field goal for good luck to make it 34-0. It was already over. There was no coming back from that. The Ducks did score on the final play of the half as Dillon Gabriel hit Trayshawn Holden for a touchdown, and Oregon definitely tried to crawl their way back, but it was just too much, and Ohio State didn't back down. It was truly a beatdown. Will Howard threw for 319 yards and 3 touchdowns. Jeremiah Smith had 187 yards and 2 touchdowns. Emeka Egbuka had 72 yards and a touchdown. TreVeyon Henderson rushed for 94 yards and 2 touchdowns. Quinshon Judkins rushed for 85 yards. I mean, Oregon couldn't stop Ohio State at all. As for Oregon, Gabriel had 299 yards and 2 touchdowns, and Holden had 116 yards and also 2 touchdowns. But passing was really the only way the Ducks could move the ball. Oregon was down so much so fast that running the ball just didn't make sense, and they ended up having -43 rushing yards on 28 carries. Jordan James was the top rusher for the Ducks with only 14 yards on 7 carries. It was bad. There's really no way to argue against it. But Ohio State is also just a really good team. Oregon had an incredible season no matter what. Dillon Gabriel was great. He threw for 3,857 yards, 30 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions, and rushed for 149 yards and 7 touchdowns. He'll get drafted, but surely not as a top quarterback. Tez Johnson was the #1 with 898 yards and 10 touchdowns on the season. Trayshawn Holden and Evan Stewart are both other interesting wide receiver options, as is Terrence Ferguson at tight end. Jordan James also really broke out at running back, rushing for 1,267 yards and 15 touchdowns, adding 209 receiving yards. Mateo Yu was a force all season at defensive end. He ended with 10.5 sacks, an interception, and 2 forced fumbles. Safe to say that he probably had a better season than his brother DJ. Defensive end Jaden Birch had 8.5 sacks and a forced fumble and a fumble recovery. Then linebacker Tatum Tuioti, only a sophomore, had 5.5 sacks and a forced fumble. Then Derek Harmon had 5 sacks at defensive tackle. There really was just so much talent on Oregon, so it's no surprise how the Ducks were so good. Dan Lanning has a machine that really doesn't feel like it'll stop anytime soon. Oregon just needs to find another good transfer quarterback in the portal and continue to develop talent the way that it has. And if they do, Lanning can keep churning. When a season ends the way it did for Oregon, it can leave a sour taste in your mouth. But everyone mostly believed that the Ducks were the best team in the country before the college football playoff. Maybe it just wasn't their day, or Ohio State is just that good. But regardless, it was a heck of a season for the Ducks, and it really promotes just how good a 12-team college football playoff is. Oregon wasn't this fringe pick for the playoff. They were the #1 seed, yet they still didn't win a single game with a 12-team format. The Buckeyes were only the #8 seed and absolutely crushed Oregon. It makes it feel like the expansion was the correct choice. Now, maybe there needs to be better seeding, considering that every top seed lost on Wednesday, but the expansion is good regardless. The Ducks will be back. Dan Lanning is building something very special and has already turned Oregon into a winning unit. It's only been 3 seasons for him at Oregon, and the Ducks are 35-6 with 2 bowl wins and a college football playoff appearance. Oregon isn't slowing down anytime soon, and neither is Dan Lanning.